CBS Late Night will be seen later tonight after the following special news presentation.
You just do what you have to do. You wake up every day and you summon up the energy from somewhere, even when you think you haven't got it, and you get through the day. And you do it day after day after day.
A CBS News special report for Terry Anderson, Freedom. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening, everybody. Freedom. What a beautiful word, and Americans everywhere had new reason to savor it today as we all let out a deep sigh of relief. This was the end, at last, of a tragedy and an outrage we'd learned to live with but never forgot. A pain we learned to endure but were never resigned to. Terry Anderson is free. He was the last of the American hostages held by pro-Iranian terrorists in Beirut, Lebanon. He had come to be a symbol of U.S. citizens held against their will and a source of strength and inspiration to his fellow hostages. Today in Damascus, Syria, he finally began to live on his own again, free, and to let it all out. So often in television news, we don't stop to listen at any length to what people say. We hope you'll take a moment now with us to listen to Terry Anderson speaking for the first time in nearly 7 years as a free man.
You can't imagine how glad I am to see you. I've thought about this moment for a long time, and now it's here, and I'm scared to death. Yesterday afternoon, my captors came in, brought some new clothes, new shoes, my first in 7 years, and they hurt my feet, by the way. And they said that I would be going home today. Today, again, spent the day pacing the room and playing solitaire and waiting. I think this last 24 hours have been longer than the whole 6.5 years.
What kept you going on, Terry? What kept you going on?
What kept me going on? Well, my companions. I was lucky enough to have other people with me most of the time. My faith. Stubbornness, I guess. You just do what you have to do. Your support, all my colleagues, journalists, has been very important. I've heard so many things over the years on the radio and in a few magazines and newspapers we've gotten about your work for me. And again, I just can't say how grateful I am. Also, the thousands and thousands of people whom I don't know, never met, don't know me, whom I know have been working and praying for us all, for all the hostages. Your support, your prayers were important. They made a big difference. They made a difference to us in some very dark times.
After you were the last one left, what did you do to occupy yourself during the day?
Paced back and forth. I had a couple of plastic bottles that I filled up with water and used as dumbbells. Played a lot of solitaire, I had a deck of cards, and listened to the radio, mostly to the BBC.
What were your last words to the kidnappers?
Goodbye.
Smiling and laughing, Anderson left Damascus shortly after that news conference, flying to the U.S. military base in Wiesbaden, Germany. He's expected to arrive in about an hour. Peter Van Sant is there. Peter?
Good evening, Dan. This may be the first trip to the hospital Terry Anderson is looking forward to. Anderson will be joining former hostages Alan Steen and Joseph Scipio. When those men were examined here, doctors discovered injuries caused by abuse.
Alan Steen emerged from his captivity with brain damage. Doctors say his kidnappers kicked his head against a wall, bruising his brain and creating problems which will last the rest of his life.
He's going to have some numbness, some incoordination of his right foot and hand. That will be permanent. He has also had partial complex seizures, which are basically short lapses of consciousness.
Very, very well.
Former hostage Joseph Scipio is in better shape than Steen and will be returning home to Philadelphia tomorrow.
There's nothing like it. Feeling is terrific.
Scipio was all smiles with his family today, but doctors say during his imprisonment he was beaten, suffered frostbite after being chained outdoors, and had a mysterious operation, which physicians here still can't figure out.
And about the time Scipio flies home, Anderson will begin undergoing a series of medical and psychological examinations. Anderson says he used water bottles as weights and that he's in pretty good shape. Dan?
Thank you very much, Peter Van Sant. Besides that physical strength that he hung on to so stubbornly, Terry Anderson was sustained by a mental toughness that seems to run in the family, exemplified by his sister, Peggy Say. One of Terry Anderson's first acts of freedom was to place a call to his brother John in Ocala, Florida.
Oh, God, Terry. Oh, it's good to hear from you. You look good. You look real good. I can't wait to see you. God, I missed you so much.
In a New York suburb out on Long Island, we asked a cousin of Terry Anderson how the Klan made it through 6.5 years of tension and fear.
Probably the worst part of it was the ups and the downs that we sustained. This is not the first time that we were told Terry would be out. We've had cases where we were told he'd be out tomorrow and only to be disappointed.
In your own head and heart, where are you now as this ordeal comes to an end?
You know, we are still on cloud nine. It's been a terrific day. After 6.5 long years, it's going to take us a long time to come down from the high that we've reached from seeing him for that first split second on television.
Terry Anderson's hometown in New York State became a lot more important as a result of his captivity, and during those long years, Batavia, New York, showed the same kind of quiet determination that brought its favorite son through his ordeal. Tonight, Batavia showed it also knows how to celebrate. Richard Threlkeld has a report.
Tonight, all over western New York State, they rang the church bells. Terry Anderson grew up in Batavia, New York, and they'd been waiting almost 7 years to throw the party they threw tonight over at the Salvation Army.
There were hundreds of people who kept this going for the hostages, especially for Terry.
Like the rest of America, Candy McConnell never forgot the hostages. Summer and winter, she and others have been tying the yellow ribbons all over town all these years.
Come on in and explain to me what all of this is.
Ann Zickel's dining room has been piled high with the consequences of the years of petitioning to free Anderson and all the others.
I hope he knows that how much people care. I know in my heart that if there were not publicity and clamor for these people, some of them would be dead. I know that.
Of course, all of them have been on our minds and in our prayers for what seems like forever. And now they're all free at last. Reason enough for the celebration today at the Associated Press in New York. Terry Anderson was their Mideast correspondent.
It's free. One of ours is free.
There's a bust of Terry Anderson on display at Batavia's downtown mall in chains. When he comes back here, they're going to break the chains. He was gone so long, a red maple sapling grew up right around the yellow ribbon they'd tied to it. Something a woman told us in Batavia about that tree has always stuck in our minds.
It's been there a long time. It's a part of the tree now, and it's Terry Anderson will never forget, and the tree won't forget.
Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, New York.
Coming up next, now it can be told. With all the hostages, all the American hostages out, we'll hear from 5 of Terry Anderson's cellmates about some of the things that really went on in the chains and darkness of Beirut.
Dear Folgers, I was catering brunch for 950 people when I forgot the ground coffee. Then I was reminded of your restaurant commercials where people were secretly switched to Folgers Crystals. So I tried it.
Let's go.
I never received more compliments. You made a believer out of me and a lot of other people.
Folgers Crystals, proven with fresh brewed coffee drinkers.
Thanks, Folgers. Ed Merrigan.
I use a shampoo for dandruff, but my scalp still itches like crazy.
You need new Scalpicin, the revolutionary scalp medicine for deep scalp itch, not ordinary dandruff. Scalpicin is not a shampoo. It's a clear liquid you don't wash away like shampoo. Apply Scalpicin anytime for deep scalp itch relief with medicine chosen by dermatologists over all these dandruff shampoo formulas. Scalpicin penetrates to relieve the itch and help prevent flaking.
The itch is gone.
New Scalpicin, the scalp medicine for deep scalp itch.
For years, Pledge has kept our furniture beautiful. Well, now New Pledge does even more with a special dust-resistant formula called Dust Block. Now Pledge actually repels dust. 2 weeks ago, I polished the word Pledge into this table. Watch. New Pledge repels over half the dust I'd get just dry dusting. Pledge knows our lives are a lot busier these days, but with New Pledge, they're a little easier, too.
New Pledge with Dust Block. It actually repels dust. From SC Johnson Wax.
Well, I thought college kids didn't need sleep. You need coffee.
I got that.
Freeze-dried? Welcome to Coffee 101. See, mine's darker. It's decaffeinated Folgers Crystals from mountain-grown beans.
My classes ended yesterday.
Mine's still darker. Taste.
This is good.
Now you're talking.
Hey, I am, aren't I?
Decaffeinated Folgers Crystals, so dark and rich. Shouldn't you switch?
Joining us now are 5 of Terry Anderson's former colleagues in captivity. 5 hostages freed at various times over the last 6 years. In our Los Angeles bureau, David Jacobson and Roman Catholic Father Lawrence Jenko. In San Francisco, Presbyterian Reverend Benjamin Ware. In Fort Collins, Colorado, Thomas Sutherland, released just 2 weeks ago. And here in New York, Robert Polhill. Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. Question. There were a number of times in which you said, there are things about our captivity that we cannot tell you for fear of jeopardizing other hostages. What is it that you now can tell us that you couldn't before? Thomas Sutherland?
Yes, Dan, we had a nice little arrangement in one prison where we were underground, and they separated us all into independent cells, i.e. isolated us. And we weren't supposed to even look out of the grills at the top of the door there, which was there for ventilation on each door. But Terry Anderson taught me, and then we both taught John McCarthy and Ryan Keenan the alphabet, the sign language alphabet. And so, although we weren't able to talk, we communicated regularly, virtually on a daily basis, and sometimes for many hours, by sign language. And I got to know a lot about John McCarthy and Brian Keenan, and they about me. And of course, had I said anything about that while Terry was still in captivity, why, I think he might have suffered a little at the hands of the Islamic Jihad.
What was the worst thing that happened to you?
Well, probably the most traumatic thing for me was to be on the mattress next to Brian Keenan when one of the less stable of the young men took after him with a broomstick and a belt and literally beat the poo out of him as hard as he could, drawing that stick and that belt. And to sit on a mattress next to a man who is being beaten like that was very, very traumatic. Had I done anything about it, such as lifting my blindfold and joining in to defend Brian, I think it would have led to much more serious things, and the guards' buddies would have been in there with guns very quickly, and it could have led to something fatal for maybe all of us.
Tell me what you heard. Were there cries for mercy? Were they saying things to him? Give us some sketch and some detail.
Well, Brian took it like a man, like a Superman, really, and he refused to whine. He refused to cry for mercy. He groaned occasionally while that fellow went after him. And finally, the guard's friends said, "That's enough, that's enough." In Arabic, "Khalas, khalas." But I would have to say that, that was a relatively isolated incident. And most of the time, the guards were very respectful.
Let's talk about retribution for a moment. Father Jenko, perhaps you and David Jacobson could address this. Retribution is a harsh word, but harsh things, as we've now heard and we now know, happened. Is it time to think in terms of retribution?
My position is not to think in terms of retribution. I know it's a position that perhaps others don't feel, but in the world that you and I live in, there's such a great need for people to think about peace and to forgive and step back and wonder why these things even happen. I think it's very important for us as we move on to the 21st century that we stop with a vindictive sense or a sense of retaliation, a sense of retribution, because all sides can claim retribution. And I think we're beyond that right now. I think we should be around tables speaking about peace and not retribution.
David Jacobson, do you agree with that? And do you find yourself, or not, sometimes thinking, despite your best instincts, yeah, I think those guys deserve to get something?
Well, Tom Sutherland, this is going to sound like the good old days. I'm going to disagree with our friend Marty to a degree. I have no desire for retribution or punishment of some of the guards. I think men like Saeed and Mahmoud were basically kind, and Abu Ali with his popcorn. But I do have a desire to see that justice is done, that murderers and kidnappers in the United States are punished, and I think those that commit these crimes overseas should also be punished. The real evil people in this mess are the Iranians, who are the true great Satan of terrorism, and the Hezbollah has been their hunting dogs. They've killed over 600 Americans, and they've kidnapped several score of Westerners, and 8 hostages that we know of died at their hands. And a little girl at an airport in Rome died of an explosion. I don't think they should be allowed to escape without some form of punishment. And I have dedicated myself to see that I can do everything I can to see that they're apprehended. But I would hope that my anger is directed to the people that have committed violent personal crimes, and then I'm able, and others are able, to distinguish between those poor Shia who were just trying to do a job, and we're not fanatics, and we're not trying to hurt us.
Robert Polhill, we haven't touched in with you the last few minutes. What about the question of retribution against, if not individuals, against Syria, against Iran?
Well, I find it hard, Dan, to suggest any kind of literal physical retribution against a nation of the kind that perhaps we inflicted on Libya some years ago. I do believe, I think along with David Jacobson and some others, that to the extent that we can legitimately prosecute any men who are captured and were involved, deeply involved in this situation, they should be prosecuted, and I'll be perfectly willing to be in court to testify to the extent that I can. I don't feel strongly that we ought to be sending in Marines or commandos or special troops or something of that sort to try and grab off a bunch of people and do whatever those kinds of forces do in achieving retribution.
Benjamin Weir, I'll give you a chance to bat cleanup here on the question of retribution, keeping in mind that I'm sure you must have heard, as I have, any number of people who say, listen, we get our last hostage out, then it'll be time to make the Iranians and the Syrians, our new, quote, allies, it'll be time to make them pay.
Well, I'm inclined to think that it is of great concern that we do not add to the cycle of violence and counter-violence. And I think we cannot easily overlook the fact that aspects of our policy within the Middle East has created a good deal of anger, certainly in Iran in the time of the Shah, in other instances where we have not been helpful to Syria or to other countries, and we have come to see the kind of reaction that has led to extremism. I think we've got to embark upon policies that really support the elements of moderation, and that's really the only way to overcome the extremism. I think the efforts now being made toward a settlement, which will be torturous and long and very difficult, but to try to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian issue is a very key issue. And I hope that with progress in that, we're going to see
more and more progress on stability in the Middle East. That's really, I think, where our effort belongs.
Dave Jacobson, I'm going to ask you to speak with the kind of complete candor which I'm told is characteristic of you. When you heard and saw and read that the United States had agreed to release monies to the Iranians, this was before Terry Anderson, I think Alan Steed was released. What went through your head and heart?
Oh, some real anger and frustration that Tom and Terry and the other men have been held for many, many unnecessary years. And I'm very angry and very frustrated that hostages in the United States has been a partisan political issue. The people out of power try to use it for advantage to gain control. And that applies to Democrats and Republicans alike. And I feel sad and angry and tormented that Tom and Terry and Sisipi and the others all had to spend so much more time in there than was necessary.
We have only a few seconds left. I wish I could ask each one of you, but Thomas Sutherland, just by luck of the draw, I'm going to ask you, do you think this ends, by and large, hostage-taking kind of terrorism in the Middle East?
I do indeed think that this is the end of it. I think that we have finally convinced the Islamic Jihad, and I hope all other comparable organizations in Lebanon as well as in other Middle Eastern countries, that kidnapping simply doesn't pay, and that indeed in Lebanon, Syria would regard further kidnappings as a direct challenge to its ability to maintain order and peace in the country, and they would not tolerate it. So I think we have seen effectively the end of kidnapping.
Let us hope that you're right. Gentlemen all, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your time with us. Thanks. Still to come on this CBS News special report, we will have reports on the diplomatic dealing that finally ended the hostage siege and what the price was. Also, a look at tenacity and tragedy, a family's long wait. So stay here with us.
Good game, good friends. And now that I use Fix-It-Int, I can tell the ref what I really think.
Fix-It-Int and forget it.
Are you nuts?
Before I switched to Fix-It-Int, Jones Peanut Crunchies only looked delicious.
Fix-It-Int and forget it. Fix-It-Int is the strongest holding denture adhesive you can get. It even stands up to the hottest liquids.
With my old adhesive, I'd never make a presentation and drink hot coffee at the same time.
For the strongest hold you can get. Fix-It-Int and forget it.
April in Paris.
He spoke English like I spoke French, but somehow we talked for hours over coffee. Coffee so rich, I thought I'd never taste its like again.
Discover the deep, rich flavor of Maxwell House Rich French Roast.
Encore un café? What?
More coffee?
Oui.
Maxwell House Rich French Roast, blended with Colombian beans because better beans make better coffee.
A message of critical importance
for everybody
about AIDS and condoms.
U.S. Surgeon General C. Everett Koop.
The best protection against the infection right now, barring abstinence, is the use of a condom. A condom should be used during sexual relations from start to finish with anyone who you are not absolutely sure is free of the AIDS virus.
Brought to you as a public service by the American Foundation for AIDS Research.
AIDS.
It's everybody's problem.
Now, a message from President George Bush.
Today, America is making real progress putting an end to illegal drug use. That's because everyone is getting involved. Parents, teachers, students, employers and employees, people everywhere participating in community programs. Illegal drugs is everyone's responsibility. It'll take time, but America is turning off drugs because Americans are making it happen.
Brought to you by the Partnership for a Drug-Free America.
The chapter on the American hostages may be closed, but the book is not finished. It's a tale of terror and trading in human beings, alive and dead, by several sides in the Middle East. Bob Simon has a report from Israel.
Prime Minister Shamir tonight said he was happy the Western hostages had been freed, but to Israelis, it was a bittersweet moment. 4 Israeli soldiers are still missing in Lebanon. One of them, navigator Ron Arad, is quite possibly alive. If he is, he could be out in the cold tonight. Israel has been dealt out of this stage of the hostage game. For months, Hezbollah demanded that Israel free its 300 Shiite prisoners, most notably including the Muslim cleric Sheikh Obey. This was a prime condition for the release of the Westerners. But suddenly, 3 weeks ago, that condition was dropped. To Israelis, the reason was clear.
The Iranians and the Syrians had no interest in Israel receiving any credit whatsoever for the release of the American hostages.
Tehran played the hostage story prominently on its TV news tonight. The Iranians and their clients apparently needed what Washington could give them more urgently than they needed what Israel had to offer their prisoners. The administration insists that the timing of Monday's payment to Tehran of $278 million had nothing to do with the hostage releases, that it was not part of a deal. Tell that to old Middle East hands.
Call it a deal, call it an understanding, call it what you will. The net effect is that both sides got what they want at the end of the day.
The Europeans and the Israelis like to point out cynically and correctly that historically, whenever hostages have been freed, money has changed hands. The negotiations between Tehran and Washington proceeded by winks and nods. The Iranians said, "We have influence." The Americans said, "Goodwill begets goodwill." And meanwhile, the actual dealing was done by the United Nations, which was crucial because it gave both sides deniability. The Americans didn't pay, the Iranians didn't even sit with the great Satan, and both sides emerged with their pride intact. Dan?
Bob, you've heard what the hostages, former hostages, had to say about retribution. I guess the question is retribution even possible?
Dan, where do you start? Who do you hit? Do you take out the guards who kept the hostages in chains? Do you go for the go-between at the Iranian embassy to Beirut, who was the actual supervisor? Can you find these guys? With the way the Western intelligence agencies have behaved regarding Saddam Hussein, it's not overly cruel to ask whether they could find anyone. Or do you bomb Tehran? That has a certain logic to it, but it's not the direction of U.S. policy right now. States forget and states forgive, Dan, often very quickly. That's how states behave. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth may be a compelling moral code, and it may have been written in this part of the world, but that was long before the advent of state-sponsored terrorism. Dan?
Bob Simon, thanks. Joining us now from Washington is our CBS News consultant on Middle Eastern affairs, the distinguished scholar and Professor Fuad Ajami of Johns Hopkins University. Fuad, you've heard this talk about the anatomy of a deal. Too strong, too dramatic, wrong?
No, I think it's just about right, Dan, and I think it's very interesting if you take a look at the timing of all this. This is really a buyer's market now. President Bush, in effect, this was panic time for the sellers. They had to dump these hostages because they weren't so terribly important anymore. And it's very interesting. If you take a look at the Bush strategy, it worked. It worked by devaluing the price of the hostages. Bush was around. He watched what happened to President Reagan, and he knew the fate of President Carter. So we started about a decade or so ago with one hostage crisis, and we saw what happens to presidents who get sucked into these affairs. He simply, Bush was willing to wait, and he waited out the Iranians.
We've seen the diplomatic equivalent of kind of the art of the deal. How important was the giving to the Iranians the money they wanted, that they felt they deserved, which happened very recently, and in effect letting Iran and Syria off the hook by pointing the finger at Libya for the blasting out of the sky of the Pan Am jet over Scotland?
Exactly. The Libyans were the convenient scapegoat. I mean, they were the ideal people to stick with the Lockerbie tragedy. We, in effect, have engaged the Iranians and the Syrians. We are willing to rehabilitate them. And look at the Syrian situation also in Beirut. Beirut was a free-for-all, and it was a jungle. It was an anarchy. Now Beirut has a power behind the scenes, and the power is Damascus. So the people in Damascus have sent their delegation to Washington to do business with the Americans. The Iranians are keen to do business with the Americans. And I think we decided in some way, the message was to Iran and to Syria, was if you're willing to change, we're willing to accommodate you. We've accommodated these people. And I think the judgment that President Bush has made was to say, look, we can't win this one. We can't win this one, so we must be careful not to overprice these hostages, and this is where we are today.
Fuad Ajami, thanks. Coming up next on this CBS News special report, True Grit, the story of the Anderson family's 6-year siege.
Introducing Glade Plug-ins Potpourri.
Plug it in fresh in the air. Plug it in fresh in everywhere.
Plug into freshness with Glade Plug-ins, now in Potpourri.
Plug it in, plug it in.
Sometimes I soak my dentures or I use toothpaste. Sometimes I soak then use toothpaste. Sometimes I...
Wait! All you need is Denture Cream. In just 90 seconds, Denture Cream gets dentures nearly twice as clean. So why buy 2 products when all you need is Denture Cream?
A kiss? No, I'm sorry. I don't think so.
Oh, no, please, no, baby, no.
Oh, not a good idea. Not now.
No, bad time.
Fight morning breath with Scope. Scope has 2 powerful ingredients that kill 90% of the bacteria that cause morning breath.
Your kiss is ready. Pucker up.
Right on the kisser.
Come on. Kiss morning breath goodbye with Scope.
Give me that kiss. It's gone. But it isn't.
Vicks introduces an incredible new cough drop.
It's gone, but it isn't.
A cough drop so powerful, it keeps on working even after the drop is gone. It's extra strength Vicks, a new kind of Vicks with twice the Vicks vapor medicine to relieve your cough and help your scratchy throat and stuffy nose feel better, even after the drop is gone. New extra strength Vicks, extra strong to work.
Even after it's gone.
April in Paris.
He spoke English like I spoke French, but somehow we talked for hours over coffee. Coffee so rich, I thought I'd never taste its like again.
Discover the deep, rich flavor of Maxwell House Rich French Roast.
Encore un café?
What?
More coffee?
Oui.
Maxwell House Rich French Roast, blended with Colombian beans because better beans make better coffee.
It's a phrase we've used more times than we can count. Terry Anderson, America's longest held hostage. Today, he said that was a distinction he could have done without. Bruce Morton is here now with perspective, reporting on some of what happened during Terry Anderson's long absence.
They took him March 16, 1985. AP photographer Don Mell told CBS News what had happened.
They pushed Terry into the back of this green Mercedes with a curtain around the back of it.
Glenn Anderson, Terry's father, had hoped he would be home that first Christmas.
I know he's coming home, but...
How can you be so sure?
Faith.
But Glenn Anderson never saw his son again. He died in February 1986.
It's sad that Terry's not here, but he'll be home soon.
Terry's brother, Glenn Jr., was wrong. He would not see his brother again either, despite a videotaped plea to his kidnappers.
Now I have cancer. And I made a vow I would not die till I saw my brother Terry.
Glenn Anderson died in June of 1986. Peggy Say, Glenn and Terry's sister, spoke at the funeral.
John Wayne once said, "Courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. My family knows how to saddle up."
Say, as much as anyone, kept reminding the country about the hostages. Videos from Lebanon helped too.
How long must we stay in captivity? How long will the American government not pay attention?
That was October '86. The government was paying attention, trading Iran arms for hostages. When that story broke, the trading stopped.
There is a limit to how long we can last. But some of us are approaching that limit very rapidly.
Christmas 1987.
Happy birthday, dear Daddy.
Terry Anderson has a daughter who, until today, he'd seen only on video.
Happy birthday, Terry Anderson!
Back home, Say kept the pressure on. Programs marked Terry Anderson's birthdays, marked the anniversaries of his kidnapping.
I know that it's rainy, it's cold, and it's uncomfortable. But if you think you're uncomfortable, you just think about Terry Anderson.
But as my 4th birthday in captivity passes, and as the end of my 4th year approaches, I find it difficult to keep my hopes and my courage high.
Say kept the pressure on.
I don't know, Harley, what to say to you anymore. All I can tell you is keep strong and keep your faith and believe as I do that someday, some way, you're going to come home. I love you.
Terry Anderson has been a hostage for 6.5 years. Lost a father, lost a brother. Finally now, Peggy Say will be able to say the one thing she's been waiting to say. Welcome home. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
And so the last of the American hostages is on his way home from Beirut, the last of 10 to be reunited with their families and friends. But, lest we forget, there were 3 other Americans who never made it out of the black hole of Beirut. William Buckley was the CIA station chief in Beirut, kidnapped in 1984 by Iranian-supported Islamic Jihad, killed the next year. Peter Kilburn, librarian at the American University in Beirut, shot to death in 1986. United States Marine Colonel William Higgins, head of a UN observer team at the time, hanged, it is said, in 1989. Amid the joy of homecoming, names that echo and remind us of the violence and evil, the madness that created this long outrage. I'm Dan Rather, CBS News, New York. Good night.
Dear B, if and when you ever receive this letter, I will have been shipped home in a basket. I can truthfully say I liked you more than any one person I've ever known. I am wishing you all the joy and happiness possible. With all my love, John.
Join General Norman Schwarzkopf and me on December 7th as we remember Pearl Harbor.
This is CBS.
Well, I think we should talk a little bit about your manuscript, don't you?
Yeah, sure. I guess so.
Is the book finished? What I mean is, have you written more than these 3 chapters?
No. That's it so far. I haven't, well, I wasn't sure it, well, what do you think?
Honestly, I think it's gruesome, repulsive. Let's face it, you've written the story of a series of sadistic murders of women, described in minute detail and from the psycho killer's point of view.
Ah. I see. Well, I guess,
But I also think it's just tremendous.
Oh, thanks. So I guess...
Which isn't to say it doesn't give me the creeps. What I'm saying is, I think I'd like to buy your book. Thanks. And the check, please, when you got a chance. But you understand the decision isn't only up to me. I'm just a lowly peon. Roger Martin, my boss, he's the one who says yes or no. Who's your agent?
Oh, no, I don't hold with agents. This sleazy scum pick up spit.
Don't you? Oh, you really should, you know. Well, how can I reach you then?
I just moved. I move a lot, you know, so I never have a phone. I don't hold with phones much anyway. People call you, you can't control who. A foreigner called me in the middle of the night once. I'll get back to you in a week.
Lunch is on Martin Publishing. No phone, no address, no agent, and a brilliant manuscript about hideous murders. You really are a strange one, Charlie Gordon.
So he wasn't at all like the man in your dream?
No. Well, he was perfectly normal. Well, maybe a little bit strange. Kind of babbled, hates agents, hates phones, moves a lot.
Anything else?
Well, I thought he kept fooling around with his knife in a weird way. It probably just says something about me, huh? It's just so hard to believe that he's actually written this awful stuff. Did you read the copy I gave you?
Yes. Yes, I did.
And?
I think your Mr. Gordon has captured, with absolute clinical accuracy, the personality of a severely disturbed individual. A sadist. A sociopath.
It's really something, isn't it? I mean, what an imagination.